These quotes that I'm going to share are supposedly actual quotes. And I'm not going to tell you who it was that said them because it would not be to their best advantage. But these are prominent people that have said this. I'm not going to have some reporters pawing through our papers. We are the president. The president, and it wasn't the president, by the way, that said that. The president has kept all the promises he intended to keep. How would you like a president to say that for you? We are ready for an unseen event that may or may not occur. It's wonderful to be here in the great state of Chicago. I was recently on a tour of Latin America, and the only regret I have was that I didn't study Latin harder in school, so I would converse with these people. These are actual quotes. The loss of life will be irreplaceable. When I have been asked during these last weeks who caused the riots and the killing in L.A., my answer has been direct and simple. Who is to blame for the riots? The rioters are to blame. Who is to blame for the killings? The killers are to blame. Republicans understand the importance of bondage between a mother and a child. It isn't pollution that's harming the environment, it's the impurities in our air and water that are doing it. Sounds like political to-speak, doesn't it? What a waste it is to lose one's mind, or not to have a mind is being very wasteful. How true that is. And really what they were trying to say is a mind is a terrible thing to waste. I love California. I practically grew up in Phoenix. When more and more people are thrown out of work, unemployment results. Half this game is 90% mental. Things are more like they are now than they ever were before. A verbal contract isn't worth the paper it's written on. The streets are safe in Philadelphia. It's only the people that make them unsafe. The police are not here to create disorder. They're here to preserve disorder. Now, that's a great statement, Andy, isn't it? Traditionally, most Australia imports come from overseas. They're multi-purpose. Not only do they put the clips on, but they take them off. And that was when they spent $1,000 on a pair of ordinary pliers. And the last one, we're going to turn this team around 360 degrees. Now, you know, people mean well by what they say, don't they? It's just that sometimes we don't say what we think we mean. And all of us have been guilty of saying things that we wish that we could take back, haven't we? If I could go back and relive just portions of my life, I don't want to live my whole life again. It's taken me 62 years to get here, and I really don't want to go back to square one. There are some things I would love to redo again, but not everything. And but every one of us would love to be able to re-say some things. James said this. He said, we all stumble in many ways. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. If we could just manage what we say, it would be so much better for us. But you know what? It's not only just what we say, it's what we do too that causes such destruction. Most everybody remembers where you were on September the 11th, 2001. I can tell you exactly where I was at. And if you had a loved one, and maybe some of you know someone that was in one of the towers on that day, but would it be a struggle for you to forgive those that caused that? I think all of us would would agree that it would be a struggle. It would be a hardship to go in, and maybe you have been guilty of saying, I will never forgive that person. And you just hold on to such hurt and such bitterness inside of your life. Maybe you've lost a relative or a loved one to someone else's negligence. Or maybe there's been a relationship that has wounded you incredibly. And we carry around such scars in our emotional heart. And so forgiveness is perhaps one of the most emotional and psychological experiences that we battle with inside of our life and that we encounter. And those things that come up because of forgiveness or lack thereof, the unforgiveness inside of our life, causes so much inside of our life. There's feelings of anger and the perhaps maybe even revenge that wants to bubble up inside of us, the resentment and hurt and hostility that becomes so prevalent in someone who is holding tenaciously on. There's a sadness and a bitterness inside of us. The Bible talks about that root of bitterness that can spring up inside of our life. And that root, when it gives birth to something. My next door neighbor, he was trying to dig out he'd cut off an evergreen between his driveway and his house, and he was just trying feverishly to get that root system out. And you know, when root systems go deep and then they go out and they begin to hold on, what you see above is small in comparison to what's below. And it's the same way in our life. These roots that the enemy plants, sometimes with the smallest seed of hurt or of things, they go down deep, and we have a tendency to nourish those things. And we're going to talk about those in a little bit, but we began to water those things. Someone gave us, and I mentioned this some time ago, they gave us a 4-stalked poinsettia for Christmas. And it's still going, and it's still changing leaves and colors. But I'll tell you what, I've never worked so hard on a poinsettia in all my life, trying to keep that thing going. But do you know, there are a lot of people that do the same thing with bitterness and unforgiveness and struggles inside of their life. They even move towards planning retaliation and retribution against a person that has caused that hurt and that anger inside of us. And even when we start moving towards healing in the places for forgiveness for us, you know, there are other things that begin to take place. We have to work on reconciliation. Coming to a place where we bring into balance those relationships, and that's not always easily done, because it takes two in order to bring healing in relationships, doesn't it? Not too long ago, I asked somebody about something that was going on with someone, and the answer was, I don't know. And how can you deal with a situation when you don't even know what the problem is? Sometimes we hurt people and we don't even realize that we have hurt them. And so we go around in life oblivious to the fact that we've hurt them, and yet we can tell there's a definite change in relationship with them. So what do we do? What do we go about in our walk? It comes to a place where there has to be compromise and concession in our life, even to a place where we go through places of contrition and we bow our heart. Maybe even atonement. And atonement, if you break that word down, atonement, a simple definition means at one month. Coming into reconciliation. My wife and I, we just had a situation yesterday, and she said something that hurt me. And she didn't intend to. And we had to talk about it. It was not the intent of her heart, but the result was the same. And you know, in our lives, sometimes we don't aim to hurt people, but the result is the same. We do. So what do? We can't let it go. I know, obviously, that there have been people that I have hurt. There have been times that I've reached out and left phone call messages and never got a phone call back, trying to reach out and bring reconciliation. It takes two. It takes a healing that God does. And so this thing called forgiveness is at the very heart of Christianity, and it's at the very core of what essential love is, extreme love. And that's what today's title for the message is forgiveness. It's extreme love. Because if we really are going to walk in forgiveness in our life, there has to be the underlying thing. I had a wonderful time to get together with Isaac and Rebecca. It's just a little over a month before they'll be married. Can you believe that? Wow. And we're talking about the different kinds of love that are involved in that. And we talk about agape love. And agape love is selfless love. It means putting the needs of someone else before you put your own needs. That's not always easy done. Do you know we live most of our life in self-preservation mode, don't we? We do what we can in order to protect our heart and so that we remain intact in our life. We put up walls. I just was listening this morning. If anybody read Our Daily Bread or listened to it as I do, and he talked about building walls in our life, and there's a tendency to build walls in our life, but as Christians, we've got to have windows in our walls. You know, it's so easy. There are times, my daughter and I are very the same. You know, there are just times that I need my space. Anybody else like that? I mean, I just need my space. Just me and me time. You know, and God is welcome to be there. I don't have a problem with God being there. But everybody else, just please give me some time. My wife and I, and she's not here, but I'd say it if she were here. My wife and I have these things. My wife is an extrovert. You know that just knowing her. But the way she deals with problems is as an extrovert. Now, if you put me in a ministry situation, I'm an extrovert. I mean, you can put me in a room and, you know, I'll go around and I'll introduce myself and but if you put me in a ministry situation where I'm not in charge and I don't have to do anything, I will just blend into the wall. You know, I'll let everybody else take lead on that. And that's kind of the way I deal with conflict, too. My wife is, when something happens, she is lovingly in your face. And I'm the kind of guy where I say to her, sweetheart, if you just give me 20 minutes, it won't be an issue. But she doesn't want that 20 minutes. It has to be dealt with now. And it's just the way we process things. You know, I like everything. I'm a strange mixture. I'm OCD. I like everything in my life in order. But if you go look in my garage, or you look in either one of my offices, my home office, my church office, it is anything but tidy. You know why? Because everything else takes priority over straightening up. But if you were to give me an option, I would love tidiness. I would love to be able to go in and not have clutter. But our life doesn't always afford that, does it? And so for us, in our relations with people, we've got to make the main thing the main thing. And that's all about keeping our relationships healthy and whole. And so, for me, give me an opportunity. Let me get my struggle and my angst in order. And once I've got it in order, then I'll share it outwardly with you. Now that's good in theory, but do you know sometimes a person needs someone to get in the midst of them, like my wife, and get, and not let go until she's rooted out the very root cause of what the problem is. We need people like that in our life. And today, this topic, I know that it's for someone about unforgiveness. And it takes extreme love. I want to share 5 real-life situations with you. Events that have happened and how God, working in their life, has given them in extreme opportunities to hold bitterness and resentment. They stepped over the threshold and they offered forgiveness. The first of these happened in Amish country. It was West Nickel Mines Amish School. Back in the early, mid-2000s, maybe you remember this. And there was a perpetrator. There was a man that took 10 Amish girls and bound them up. And before he took his own life, he shot all of them and killed 5 of them. And the immediacy of what happened in the community of faith was remarkable. Within hours, these families began reaching out to the wife of this man and his family, his parents, in order to bring comfort to them. And one of the grandfathers of one of the murdered girls, he cautioned the family not to hate the killer. And this was what he said: "We must not think evil of this man." Another one of the fathers of the young girls said, "He had a mother and a wife and a soul. Now he's standing before a just God." What would it be like if one of those were your daughters? How would you have responded? There's a picture, actually, of that Amish situation representing. The second, and you can bring the next picture up, was Eric Fitzgerald. Eric Fitzgerald was a young pastor. His wife and his daughter and his wife was expecting. And one night they were out in the car, and there was another man by the name of Matthew Swatzel was coming home after a long shift as an EMT. And as he was coming home, he fell asleep and he ran into the car with June and her pregnant child and their little girl. And the little girl survived the accident, but his wife and their little boy that was yet to be born were killed. And so it came for an opportunity for this young man, Eric, and he could choose whether he could pursue the law to the furthest extent, or he could choose a situation where there would be less of a charge brought against. And he wanted to extend the grace of God to this young man. He didn't do it intentionally. But do you know, even our unintentional actions bring hurt. My wife's life in April 2016 was forever changed. And I was on the phone with her that day. We had just left a staff meeting here at the church. Carrie would have normally been with one of us, and Josiah would have been the other. And on that particular day, they only had a half a day of school. And Carrie stayed over with a friend that lived right there by Borland Manor. Otherwise, she would have been in the vehicle with my wife. And I was talking, and on my way, I was taking Josiah up to visit his cousin up in Gibsonia. And while we were talking, all of a sudden, Doreen stopped talking, and I said, "What's wrong?" Most all of you know that she was rear-ended up at the turn in 19 there by Hill Church. Gwen was one of the first ones that she left and went up, but our life in those moments were forever changed. And our insurance didn't cover. Our insurance covered less than 50%. His insurance covered less than 50% of her first surgery. Thousands of dollars. And we were given the option by our lawyer that we could pursue more. It would have literally taken everything this man had. And it was an accident. There was no reason to ruin more than one life. We've all we've had accidents. And this young man, and it so happened that one day, Eric and Matthew ran into each other by a God event in a store. And Eric, whose wife and child had been killed, went up to Matthew and embraced him. And after that, they began to meet for coffee and conversation. And they began a relationship that was because of that. I want to roll you to a third event that happened. You remember the Sandy Hook Elementary shooting? This man, Robbie Parker, his 6-year-old daughter was gunned down that day. I would like to think that I would handle it in a godly way, but you never know until you're in a situation like that. And shortly after this, he stood before the media and he addressed the fact that his daughter and 26 others had been killed. And with a trembling voice and with his face stained with tears, he said this: "We'd like to offer our deepest condolences to all the families who are directly affected by this shooting. It's a horrific tragedy, and we want everybody to know our hearts and our prayers go out to them. This includes the family of the shooter. And I can't imagine how hard this experience must be for you. And I want you to know that our family and our love and our support goes out to you as well." He goes on to say this: as we move on from what happened here, what happened to so many people, let it not turn into something that defines us, but something that inspires us to be better, to be more compassionate and more humble people. Wow. The scene changes to another. Mary Johnson. Her son was at a party in Oshea, Israel, had pulled out a gun and had killed him. And her initial reaction would have been like any of ours, that The initial thing was that she wanted justice. Justice in its full extent. And this young man, Hosea, he served 17 out of 25 and a half year sentence. But during the course of that time, Mary began to go visit Hosea in where he was incarcerated. And she said the first day that she went to visit and she was there, this was her quote. She said, "It moved up my legs and it just moved up my body. When I felt it leave me, I instantly knew that all that anger and hatred and animosity I had in my heart for you for 12 years was over. I had totally forgiven you." Only God. And when Hosea was released from his time of serving, he went home to the neighborhood where Mary lived and actually lived next door to her, and that was by Mary's design. She actually began on occasion to refer to him as son. The grace of God for us. Israel said this, "I admire you for your being brave enough to offer forgiveness and for being brave enough to take that step. It motivates me to make sure that I stay on the right path." The last that I want to share with you happened down at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church down in Charleston, North Carolina. You all remember that? That wasn't too terribly long ago. A young man went into their Bible study. They welcomed him, as would we, with open arms. And he ended up killing a number of people, 9 church members that night. And what happened after that is that they began to just share with this young man. And one of the mothers of one of the ladies that was shot, she said, "We welcomed you Wednesday night in our Bible study with open arms. You have killed some of the most beautifulest people that I know." And calls her son by name. "He was my hero. But as we say in Bible study, we enjoyed you, but may God have mercy on you." How would we respond? How would we respond? But do you know, every one of us on a daily basis have an opportunity to walk out forgiveness, don't we? Not on the magnitude of those 5 incidents, 6 if you count Pastor Doreen's. But I want to quickly give you 10 things for us to look at in our life that we can walk. 10 keys to forgiveness inside of our life. And if we can walk these out, doesn't matter whether it's a word or an action, or even the perception of wrong done to us, it will cause change. The first of these is that we have to let go of anger. We have to not hold on to these things. These things hold us in bondage. Dr. Michael Obsatz, he said that there were, in his book called Healing Our Anger and 7 Ways to Make Peace in a Hostile World, he said that there are 8 types of anger. He said there's chronic anger, which is the kind that just it's perpetuated, goes on. There's volatile anger, where a person will just respond out of anger. Have you known people like that? They act and then think. There's judgmental anger, and so many people walk in that because it is anger that we bring about our criticalness of other people. There's passive anger. How many people operate in passive anger? They may not say it, but the way that they act is in such a way that it is expressed indirectly. Then there's overwhelmed anger. When we just are so overwhelmed with circumstances and situations in our life that we think that we can't handle it anymore. Have you ever been that angry? There's the retaliatory anger, and that is so dangerous because we want to get even with people. We'll show them. We'll pay back. There's self-inflicted anger that we bring on ourselves because of maybe actions that we cannot forgive ourselves for. God's forgiven us, but we can't forgive ourselves. And the eighth is constructive anger. Constructive anger actually is something that brings us to a place where we can put it to positive use. 7 out of the 8 are negative, and we cannot let them be operational inside of our life. The second thing, the second step is that we cannot be stubborn. Have you ever known anybody stubborn? You know, it's easy to hold on to anger and our hurt feelings. Feels good, doesn't it? There's something about being cajoled by our own anger. That we've been wrong. There's been injustice done to our life. And there's something about this comfortable feeling of retribution that buries itself deep inside of our heart. We want to punish that person. But what happens is when we allow that to become entrenched, I was talking about that root a while ago, when it goes down and then it becomes a stronghold inside of our life. And a stronghold is not something that you can release yourself from. It becomes a vortex of emotional turmoil inside of our life. But see, when we allow compromise that allows us to move forward, then there can be healing. The third kind of thing that we have to do beyond and moving on from our stuck position is that we have got to stop thinking about ourselves as a victim. Victim mentality. Woe is me. I have been wronged. I have been done unjustly. You know, if we allow ourselves to live out this injustice, and there are some times that, you know, we have a right to feel that way, but we can't give ourselves the license to feel that way. Did Jesus have a right to feel angry? Yes, he did. But he didn't let himself go there. You know, we feel sorry for ourselves, and we want others to feel sorry for us too. And then we can become offended at them because they don't feel offended with us. And then there's the transfused. There's the misplaced anger, where you pick up someone else's anger. And you pick up a vendetta that's not even yours to pick up. And you carry it. Some of you have heard of a man by the name of Bishop Desmond Tutu from Africa. And he wrote a book called There Is No Future Without Forgiveness. And he talked about the fact that unless we forgive people, that they still have us imprisoned. We could be set free from a physical prison and yet still live in emotional bondage because we have not let ourselves be set free. POAs. And those that have gone through difficult situations with loved ones that have maybe died. And then there are the POWs that have been kept unjustly. Feelings of hurt and destruction will hold us in bondage. The fourth step is that you and I have to focus on the future. What did Paul say? Forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forth to those things which are before. We press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. You know, and when we continue to bring up things, you know, most all of us have gotten scars in our body. You know, you may notice that I have this wonderful scab on my eye this morning. And it is, I had a close encounter with a three-dimensional door. And of no one else's fault except my own. But if I continue to scrape off this scab, will it cause pain? A little bit. But what will happen is if I continue to do that, it will leave a permanent mark. In our life, we keep scratching off things that are almost healed in our life emotionally. And we just keep bringing those things. We dredge them up. Sometimes we don't even remember what we were wounded over. We just know we were wounded. And we keep holding on to the wound, but we don't remember what it was. We have to let those things go. We've got to focus. There's a story about two friends that go out, and they were traveling in a very desolate area through the desert. And in the process, one of the friends said something that offended the other friend. And the friend that was offended reached down in the sand and he wrote out this situation that had just happened as a reminder. They went on, and what happened is that later this friend that had been offended actually fell into a situation where he was in the process of almost drowning, and the other friend reached in and pulled him out to safety. And when he did, this friend then took and he chiseled in the rock the incident. And the friend said, "Why was it that you wrote one offense in sand, and then the other situation you wrote in the rock?" And he said, in our life, we have to write our offenses in the sand and let the winds of time blow them away. But things that bring change for good in our life, we have to etch in stone. In our life, whoever has wounded us, it's not worth it. Even if you were unjustly treated, even if you were wronged, it's not worth holding on to it. We've got to keep on. The next thing is that we have to relearn trust in our life. One of the hardest things is when a relationship, where a person in a relationship has broken trust with the other person, especially in marriage. Trust is so easily lost and so hard to regain. But we have to train ourselves. Have a situation, a couple that I went to church with down in Texas, and lovely family. Their son was in the youth group that I worked with, and the place where I moved was in a place called Kingwood, and they had the largest home in Kingwood. Their house had 40 rooms. Their house had 10 bathrooms. You can only use one bathroom at a time. He had been a high executive down in the oil market in Houston. And what happened is that their marriage was headed to divorce. And God got a hold of their marriage. To meet them, you would never know that that's the home they had. They pastor now. See, he was unfaithful to his wife. He was involved in alcohol. There is no situation that is unfixable by God, but it takes commitment through pain and forgiveness beyond the hurt. Relearn the trust. The next one is be reasonable in your expectation of others. Have you ever put undue expectations on people? But we don't like it when undue expectations are put on us, do we? It's easy to dish out. No, not so easy to take. And things in life don't always happen intentionally. The next thing is understand that expect it to take time to forgive. It doesn't happen overnight. Has to be times where, we're so used to quick things. McDonald's, unless you go to New Jersey, and then McDonald's are not quick. And then there's all kinds of things inside of our life. We're instant to instant everything. Instant potatoes, instant rice, instant this, instant that. But forgiveness isn't always instant, but it begins by a choice. You can't depend on forgiveness to be motivated by your emotion. It has to begin by a choice to do so. You see, because there are deeper emotional circumstances, and then there are lesser offenses. But we just have to remember that we have to let it go. The next thing, number 8, is we have to examine our heart. Sometimes that's not easy to do, is look inside of ourselves, is it? Because if we find that the travesty may not be in the person that wronged us, but in us holding on to where we were wronged. That may be the greater offense. That may be the greater injustice in God's eyes, is when we look down inside of ourselves. There was an individual that had written this as values. And it sounds like a preschool list. Be tolerant of others. Treat others like you want to be treated. Be polite with your interactions. Treat others with respect. Avoid criticizing others. Don't jump to conclusions. Give others the benefit of the doubt. Be willing to overlook minor offenses. Have a positive attitude and be willing to apologize. And the last one may be the hardest of them all. When was the last time that you said, I'm wrong and I'm sorry? It does the heart good to keep it soaked in the waters of humility. The next one is let forgiveness become an everyday practice for us. Forgiveness shouldn't be something that you do Christmas and Easter. And then as you roll over the new year. It should be something that's done. And the last, ask God for guidance. Because believe me, to do the other 9, you'll need this one. You see, because unforgiveness in our life is not just an emotional thing, it is a spiritual dimension that has to be overcome. Because the enemy would want to keep you. See, because forgiveness for us has to be limitless, doesn't it? In Matthew 18:21, it said, Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Up to 7 times? Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. For every one of us, we have got to let God work inside of us. I close with this scripture. Colossians 3:12 through 14 says, Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, Clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievances you may have against one another. Forgive as the Lord forgave you, and over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Remember these 10 points. Let go of the anger. Don't be stubborn. Stop thinking of yourself as a victim. Focus on the future. We learn to trust. Be reasonable in your expectation of others. Expect that it will take time to forgive. Examine your heart. Let forgiveness become an everyday practice. And ask God for guidance.